And you might see now that the PMA logo and Matthew 25 logo are up there, and we'll discuss those in a bit. In fact, PMA we'll discuss right now. If you don't know, PMA, Presbyterian Mission Agency, is one of the branches of ministry within the denomination in Louisville. And under Presbyterian Mission Agency is TFE, Theology, Formation, and Evangelism, which is where we fall. So that's kind of just a little bit about where we come from and how we fit into the bigger picture of the church. And I know it's a balmy Sunday, or Saturday, and you're probably all looking at your watches, wondering. Yeah. Wondering when you're gonna go, and how long this is gonna last. That's a picture from Carlton from this summer at our conference. I just thought I'd throw it in there for a little humor. Yeah. But I promise this presentation is going to be like Zacchaeus. It's going to be short and educational.
Yes.
So, just a little bit about me. As I've shared before, I'm from northern Minnesota, live there, but I grew up, born in Anamosa, went to Monticello Presbyterian Church, and then we went to Kenwood Park Presbyterian Church, and then we moved down south to Oklahoma. I came back to Iowa for seminary at Dubuque, so I'm in this area. My family's in this area. My aunt and uncle and cousins go to this church. A few years ago, I implored them to give me the, what was it? It was a black walnut tree that had fallen, and they were taking it down. I implored them to give it to me so that I could make something for you guys, but they said somebody else already claimed it. But anyway.
I hope you've looked upstairs at the things that were
I
made with that.
I haven't yet.
Well, please go to the sanctuary.
I will.
It's made with that.
My wife and I have been together for almost 15 years. She's a ELCA pastor and has been for about 20 years. We have a son, Kyle, and they're actually both with me this weekend, because he has off for a few days. And then our dog, Schroeder, that we adopted, and that is him sleeping in the desk drawer of my desk. He does that in the winter months sometimes. I love to fish. We both love, Cal and I love to be outdoors, and Kristen does too, both regular fishing and fly fishing. And then I love to work with my hands, do woodworking. These are planes I've restored and some things I've built over the years. And I really just love working with my hands and kind of being out there and just making things, but that doesn't always work in the winter in Minnesota. So in the winter, I turn to my indoor workshop of cooking. I love cooking. And this is kind of a presentation of what the French call the mise en place, where you get your stuff in place and you get all your ingredients ready, you get things prepared, you have it all diced and cut and chopped and measured, so that once you get cooking, you can just go with it. You don't have to worry about, what's coming next, or do you have a teaspoon of milk ready. And as I started thinking about mise en place and getting things in place and recipes, it dawned on me that cooking is really a good analogy for VCI, for Vital Congregations Initiative. But traditionally, you'd have a recipe. You would have ingredients, and you'd be told, put a dash of this in, a pinch of that, a cup, an ounce, whatever, and then you'd have a list of rules that you would have to follow. Cook for this long, do those kind of things. And it's not really like that for VCI. We don't have the list of rules. We have a list of ingredients, but we don't have the amounts to put in. So it started to feel more like it was cooking, but not really at home. So more like cooking at a cooking show. And sometimes church life can feel like we're cooking on his cooking show, on Gordon Ramsay's show, but really, it's my favorite cooking show is Chopped. It's more along the lines of cooking on Chopped. Now, if you haven't seen Chopped, I got a little intro here for you.
Champions, start your engines. We are gearing up for another amazing culinary fight here. Chefs, as you may recall, there are 3 rounds: appetizer, entree, and dessert. Each course has its own basket of mystery ingredients, and you must use every ingredient in the basket in some way. Also available to you, our pantry and fridge. The judging criteria: presentation, taste, creativity. If your dish doesn't cut it, you will be chopped. Chopped champions, please open your baskets. And your appetizers must include fruitcake, shad roe, starts on the clock. Time starts now.
So Chopped is a cooking show. They invite chefs from around the world to come on, and they're given a basket full of ingredients that are mystery ingredients, and they're told they have to make an appetizer. Then the next round they have to make a main course, and then they have to make a dessert, and they're given random ingredients. Here it's cucumber, it's liquefied kimchi, I think that's cheese, and nutria is actually rodent. Some rodent that's eaten somewhere. And so they had to make a main dish out of this.
It's like an oversized guinea pig.
Yep, it's a very big guinea pig.
That's disgusting.
Yep, absolutely.
You realize Heifer Project uses guinea pigs
Really?
because they are eaten in South America.
Ah.
And for VCI, we give you a basket full of ingredients, the marks of congregational vitality. And we encourage you, like on Chopped, to use all of the ingredients in how you are preparing your dish, how you are preparing your congregation, how you're preparing your presbytery. We can't tell you what or how much of the ingredients to use. What we can do is we can give you guidance on these are the ingredients that we see in a vital congregation. And you guys need to go back to your communities where you serve, prayerfully discern what ingredients and how much of the ingredients you need for your context, for your area, for where you're going to be. And here are the 7 marks of congregational vitality. And we'll jump into them here. But first, like Carlton was saying, marks, we could have used lists or attributes or ingredients for that matter. But it comes from the gospel, and we like that because it's about the marks, about seeing the marks of Christ. And I like these descriptions or these pictures of Thomas better than the traditional one because he's not actually touching the marks. He's just seen them and he's in awe. He doesn't have to actually physically touch them. He can see the marks and he knows it's Christ. It's just like when we are out in public, and we hope to do with our congregations, show the marks and then they can see Christ. And we also see it in Galatians. Galatians 6:17, from now on, don't let anyone trouble me with these things, for I bear on my body the marks that show I belong to Jesus. And the first mark we have is lifelong discipleship formation. And one of the things I really enjoyed about learning this ministry and this initiative is that it's not just a category here or the mark. We have it opposed or set in contrast to how it can show up sometimes. So lifelong discipleship formation is mark 1. And sometimes that can show up in congregations contrasted as Jesus freaks or Christian hypocrisy, or it's a committee's responsibility. Lifelong discipleship formation is not just something for Christian education to worry about. It's something for everybody to be a part of. It's something for the congregation to take part in. Something for, as I know, Pastor Kyle was talking about earlier. He said that he was talking about my aunt and uncle and how well they did youth group at home with their kids, and now all their kids and all their grandkids are here as well. With the exception of Jesse, I think he's still claiming to be Catholic. And some of the ways it also shows up is intentionally sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, not just acts of kindness, and relational, not programmatic or systematic. So it's about making sure that we are connected to individuals and connecting to one another. The second mark is intentional, authentic evangelism. And these are kind of big, seminary categories or marks. And we encourage people to take them in and digest them. And if you need to reword them to something that's more palatable for your community, for your context, feel free to do so. We really encourage that because then it's yours. Second mark is contrasted with complacent Christian piety, or simply teaching good morals, or offering the latest programs. Going with the what's now, what's the greatest thing happening. And I can tell you from personal experience, I grew up, like I said, in Iowa and Oklahoma, and my church in Oklahoma, as I started high school, another church across town started up. It was Life Church, one of the biggest and fastest growing churches in the United States. And then they joined with another church and became about 20,000 members by the time I finished. We started getting members at our church after they would leave from Life Church because they wanted more depth. They wanted more relationships. They wanted to be more involved. They didn't just want the latest programs for their kids. They didn't just want the latest programs for their families. They wanted more. And so they came to our church for that reason. Some of the ways this shows up is faith, seeking understanding, cultivating wisdom, and actively following Christ. It's not just an extracurricular activity or something that's merely head knowledge. We don't just stay in and do our Bible study, but we put it into action. We go out and do that. When I was in the last parish I served in, every Thursday I would go have lunch at one of the bars in town, the local bar. There was only one that had lunch. And after about 4 weeks, the guys I was having lunch with, he said, I think I'm a member of your church. And so we got to talking, and then, because I didn't tell him I was a pastor, I just showed up and started eating. And we had conversation, relationships, and then he started coming to church. And then after about 6 more weeks, the rest of the guys started asking questions about their families, about faith, about life. And so it became this discipleship group in a bar that we were having outside of the congregation and outside of church, because we were truly cared about the other person. We truly cared about how was happening and where they were going. The third mark, and you'll notice the Matthew 25 logo appears up here, is outward incarnational focus. And this, again, these marks are not independent of each other. They're all interwoven. Because if you have an outward incarnational focus, you're going to be outwardly caring about other people. You're going to be doing evangelism and telling them why you're doing these things and showing them the mark of God's love. This is contrasted with outward institutional survival and closed communities of assimilation and exclusion. Social clubs. We've all been with churches or been to churches that feel more like a social club, that they're there to make sure the lights stay on for that last person, and have a hard time including people into the church, into the community. One of the churches I attended worship at, it was a big thing to get a name tag, because if you had a name tag, you were a part of that church. But that became a barrier for a lot of people that were visiting, that they didn't have a name tag. So how are we caring for people? It is an outward exploration and awareness where we focus on the neighbors and the neighborhoods. I don't know how many neighborhoods have remained the same over the last 2 years, let alone the last 10 years, or since the church was founded. A lot of the communities have changed, especially rural communities. Rural communities, yes, we are isolated. I live in a town of 2,200 people. We are isolated. I have 5 houses on my street. But I can meet with Carlton at any given time. I can meet with DeEtte at any given time. Where the communities have changed so drastically. I think on that street, 3 of us work remotely. So how are we focusing outside of the church building? And are we? And this is the one that ties us directly to Matthew 25. The outward incarnational focus. Matthew 25 is about the vision of the church moving beyond the walls of the church. And this is the one that ties us to Matthew 25. And empower servant leadership. There are a number of pastors here, and I'm sure you understand how important this is, because the contrast of this one is the pastor's job. Just give it to the pastor will do it. Just let the pastor deal with it. Or monopolize leadership, it's just patriarch and matriarch that deal with it. Or you hire that young, energetic pastor. Or you burn out the 2 or 3 good volunteers that you have. It's about nurturing and supporting the spiritual gifts of people in the congregation and not just monopolize power or cliques. I had a seminary professor who was a Methodist pastor, and he was at the same church for 17 years. He said he did it by having a building project going every time they were looking at moving him. So they couldn't leave. And one of the ways he formed his committees and encouraged his board to form their committees was by praying for people that they wanted to see in the community or in that committee. So the congregation, as you became a member, you would take a gifts inventory. And then they would look around these committees, they'd look around the board or session and say, okay, what gifts are missing? Who's not here? Who's not being represented? Let's pray that somebody with those gifts, those skills, rises up. Or does anybody have a name for that person? They were intentionally seeking to broaden their view of community, broaden their view of leadership, to not just the same people with the same gifts and skills, the same analytical minds, but broaden it out. And they were able to do that, and it worked really well for them. Fifth mark.
But it's
Yeah.
too hard to recruit that many people. Let's just make all the committees half the size.
We can do that. I had a session with 2 people. Robert, and then it wasn't Robert. Robert and his wife were 2 of the elders, and then what's her name? Debbie and her son were the other 2 elders. Debbie would serve with Robert, so it was man and woman, and it wasn't the same family. And then Robert's wife would serve with Debbie's son, so it wasn't the same family, and it was male and female, and that's how we had to do it. But it works. It works. Spirit-inspired worship. The contrast here: high-spirited, self-gratifying worship. Stale, ritual divorced of meaning or consumer entertainment worship. And notice there's not a word of contemporary up there or hymns up there at all. It's not about either of those. It's about helping people connect to the Spirit of God on when you worship, whenever that is. My wife's church, they have a Sunday morning worship that's fantastic and it's great. Somehow they stumbled into this Wednesday service with all these kids that show up from 5th to 7th grade, and there's like 40 of them, and they're up there singing songs and dancing. It's not the same feel. She's worried that they're getting less, but it's a Spirit-inspired worship. So they're still getting the Spirit of God, just in a different way. Worship is an active participation in the living relationship with our triune God. And it should feel welcome to all, whether it's the congregation that realizes they have somebody on the autism spectrum, and so they tone down the lights and they tone down the actions to make it more palatable for that spectrum. Or if it's, an older congregation that really loves the hymns and connects with the hymns. How do you do that? How do you engage with the Spirit in worship? This is one of my favorite ones, Mark 6. I always love caring relationships, and that was something I really community was something I strove to bring about in whatever congregation I was a part of. The contrast here is just another social club, facades, hypocrisy, judgment of the church and religion, and it's really a lot of things we hear in the culture. Because we don't often have the connection with the people where they feel safe. One of the best times, highlights of my career as a parish pastor was when somebody somebody on session told the presbytery that the church felt safe, felt like a safe place to say things, regardless of what you believed. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I can leave. 6 months later, I was gone, but it's instead of just closed, judgmental community, are we truly caring for people, not just who are members, but people who are maybe snowbirds, people who are maybe on the outsides that don't really feel like they're connecting. Maybe they come every once in a while, but invite them in, care for them. And welcome and hospitality are not just left to a committee, and they're done imperfectly. And we strive to identify all people. My wife would kill me if I shared this, but I'm going to share it anyway. When we got married at the church she was serving. And we had a number of pastors that were, because we're both pastors, that came to our wedding. 1 or 2 said yes. They came to the ceremony, but they left before the food. And so we had a bunch of extra meals. And we are walking around talking to people, and somebody comes up to me and says, Pastor Tony, and it's my wife's church. What are we going to do? This homeless woman just walked in. And I said, let's go get my wife. It's her church. We actually invited her to have one of the extra meals. and encouraged her to stay and be a part of what we were doing, because it wasn't really about us. It was about showing the marks of God's love and a caring community.
You just shared the, okay.
Number 7 is ecclesial health, or the health of a church, the health of the system. This is contrasted with unhealthy dysfunction, toxic environments, obsolete and irrelevant buildings. I have a friend whose church he served a church in Olwine for a few years, and then a couple others around Iowa, and I can't remember which church it was, but one of them, the youth, it was a downtown church, and the youth would come to the church after school, and they were just coming in droves once my friend and his wife got there. And after a few months of this, somebody on session said, well, how are we going to have these kids pay for what they're getting for free? And so it was really because they were worried about their building that was crumbling. They needed a new roof, or it wasn't ADA compliant, and yet they wanted to attract more members. And the closest group around them was a nursing home or long-term care facility, and you couldn't get into the building. So how are we prioritizing our building over our ministry, or are we prioritizing ministry over other things? And do our ministries line up with our budget, or do our missions line up with our budget? If we're say we're a church for youth, do our budgets reflect that? If we have 40 outreaches, are they beneficial to 40 different groups of individuals, or do we need to pare that down and be stronger in one or two areas? The passage we put with this, and we have passages with all of these, and it's part of the Bible studies that we give you, so that you can, as a church, you can study these, as a presbytery, you can study these. This is the passage with this one. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab some water. So as Carlton was saying, there are 3 outcomes that we hope people will, we encourage groups to look at. And just like the marks, these are not black and white. They're not individual. They're interrelated. They intermingle. There's mission clustering and partnering. So whether it's partnering with another religious organization, another church, denomination, or whatever, or partnering with another nonprofit, or partnering with another group somehow, or coming together as a group of churches so that there's 3 churches that come together and they have one full-time secretary between the 3 of them. I mean, maybe that's the way that we can make that work. One of the churches I served at, we invited the community health nurse to have an office in our space. We had a lot more people coming into the building at that time. Reforming and reimagining. Do you have to have a church building? There was a great place in King's Kitchen in Charlotte. It's this fantastic restaurant, really, really good food. I heard it's almost better than Big Daddy's,
No,
but not quite,
no,
in Atlanta.
no, it's my family restaurant.
You walk in and you're greeted with a chalkboard, and it has the days listed out for the week, and it has Sunday, they open later because they have worship in the morning, and they have classes for GED, they have all these different ways that people can connect with the community at large, and they employ people who have been recently incarcerated. And they don't have a church building, but they're a church. They worship on Sundays in the restaurant. Can we reimagine ourselves in another way? And death and resurrection, like Carlton said, we're told in the Bible that everything has a season. Everything dies. Churches don't last forever. Ministries don't last forever. People don't last forever. Sometimes death is what is on the table. But we're also told that resurrection is the final answer to death. That death is not the final answer. That we have resurrection. There's a church in my presbytery that was gifted an enormous amount of land, farmland, and they had a small congregation. Rather than leaving it dry, they sold the land and put the money in a trust. And rather than bleeding it dry to keep the church open, they closed the church. And now they have an endowment that they use to share with other churches in the area, in the presbytery, that help those churches with buildings or lights or mission trips or whatever it is? Are there ways that the resurrection can be, the church can be reformed through the resurrection? And maybe it's reforming, there's a death to the church, and the building closes, and they reform in a new location as with 1,001 worshiping community. So these aren't necessarily one on by themselves, but they're intermingled, they're mixed together. And we encourage congregations and presbyteries to look at these throughout the time. And if all of these aren't on the table, then you're doing a disservice to actually studying anything. Unless you actually put death and resurrection on the table, you're not actually studying all of the options that are out there. And that's one of the options that needs to be talked about from time to time. Let's see, next one. So, a big picture overview. Vital Congregations Initiative is a 2-year covenant relationship between presbyteries and churches and the denomination. And we covenant to walk prayerfully alongside you in relationship and guide you as you put together this basket of ingredients, and to helping revitalize where you are. The intentional effort is for revitalization, but revitalization can come in many, many different forms. And again, we are a part of the Matthew 25 vision of the church. And none of these are exclusive to one another. I mean, if you're going to have a vital church, likely you're going to be dismantling structural racism and attacking systemic poverty. And if you're attacking systemic poverty and dismantling structural racism, you're probably having a pretty vital congregation. So they kind of are interwoven within that. In the by the way department, if you're thinking, I already know this, and we've had this criticism just recently, consider this. This is my dad and my son. A year ago, last summer, we redid our kitchen. And it's a great place to cook now. I absolutely love it. Before, it was terrible, and we couldn't see the lake or anything. But almost everything moved in the kitchen. Everything except the trash. Now, this is a picture as we were working, but that's where the trash was, and we left it there while we were working. It stayed there until about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we bought this new cabinet, that exact one right there, to put our trash and recycling in. And it moved from the far end of the kitchen to the close end of the kitchen. And for over 3 years, we lived with the trash at the far end of the kitchen. And despite knowing that the trash has moved, and knowing that we needed to go to the trash from time to time, we still go to the wrong place. In fact, just the other day, I stood up, got out of the living room, put my phone on the new trash cabinet, walked to the other end of the kitchen to throw my trash away. This happens in systems too. It's not a judgment, it just happens. We get in our ruts, we get in our routines, and we flow past the other options. We flow past those things that we know are an option, the things that we should be doing, those things that we could change, those things that we could flex and do differently. So here's some bullet points on what it is. It's a time to pray and return to faithfulness in God. To remember that it's not about our activities, it's about God's activities. To assess, to honestly assess, again with all 3 options on the table, to discern and to act. It's a time to inspire openness to the Holy Spirit's transformation and change, and whatever that looks like and however that may happen. To come together as a people of God. And this is one that we've had a lot of feedback on recently, that people have said, man, that's been life affirming for me. It's having those cohorts, having those groups where we can talk as pastors, being involved with one another, being connectional again. They've found that to be really life affirming for them. It's also a time to resource and equip and support pastors and leaders. And we do that, again, through cohorts, through recommending Bible studies on the presbytery level and on the congregation level. To practice missional evangelism and faithful discipleship, whether that's individually as churches or as groups in the church or as a presbytery together. time to equip vital congregations and develop practice of sustainability and ongoing assessment, because this isn't just a one and done kind of thing. We hope this will be something that you continually, you take in, you make your own, becomes a life of who you are, part of the life of who you are. And capture congregational stories, develop new measures of vitality. And this is a fantastic time to be able to capture stories. We have the ability to capture a story at any moment and share it at any moment. We can do that. And it's important to share those stories because it's those stories that connect people. It's not the buildings, it's the memories, it's the stories. So I wanted to make this next part a little more lighthearted, also a little more memorable. So there's a few funny pictures along the way, because it is important to remember what this is not. This is not a universal program that instructs churches or presbyteries on vitality, and it doesn't assure them of vitality or a sustainable future. We can't do that. We just give you the ingredients and we give you a guide on how to use the ingredients. It is not a guarantee for revitalization for every congregation. Some congregations may not revitalize. It is not another plan that promises an immediate fix, because immediate fixes work immediately, but they tend not to work long term. It is not an attempt for the denomination to tell anybody what to do. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work on a presbytery level to a congregation, let alone a denominational level to a presbytery. And that's not going to work, because we're not in the communities. We're not in your neighborhoods. We don't know your people. You all need to tell us who you are, and you need to tell your neighborhoods who you are. It is not an institutional survival guide for membership, numbers, or buildings. I wish it was. But the Spirit of God moves as the Spirit of God moves. Sometimes a convert will go 120 miles, sometimes it'll go 140 miles. Sorry, that's a reference that you may not quite get, but.
Converts can go 120 miles without flapping their wings.
The bird?
Mm-hmm.
That's batty.
And some can go 140 miles.
Yeah, they studied.
So it's not, we can't tell you how the Spirit of God is going to move each congregation or each presbytery, but we can encourage you to get on the Spirit, to ride the wind, the air currents to where God is taking you. There's not another encouragement to tweak and yet remain the same. That's a deer. We can all tell it's a deer. Tweaking your congregation and changing the same.
Yeah, that's a moose.
It's a deer.
That's a deer. We have 15 in our backyard every day. If you tweak and remain the same, you're still going to look like a deer. Your church is still going to be the same church to the community. You might have a fancy new name. You might have a great new paint job on the outside of the building. Your parking lot might be redone and restriped, but same people on the inside. And tweaking and remaining the same is not going to work. And it is not an encouragement to go back to the days of yore, back to when you could just grow by existing. Nor is it a guidebook for calling that young pastor who's going to save you from everything, because you're going to burn everybody out. So, it is Vital Congregations, chopped edition, whatever. We give you a basket of ingredients. We encourage you to use those ingredients, because those ingredients have been shown to create a vital congregation, to help a vital congregation grow. We don't tell you how much missional work to put in. We don't tell you how much evangelism work to put in. We just tell you that these are the marks that you should use. And we encourage you to talk to each other and say, this is working for my church. Well, this isn't working for me. How'd you get it to work? And we encourage you to be a part of each other's lives. Before we finish, any questions? Any thoughts? Comments?
What was the last, when you were giving the descriptions, pray to return to the influence of God, honest assessment, and then what was the last one on that page, right after equip vital congregations?
Congregational stories.
Yeah.
Let's do something about that.
Scroll up what it is. There it is.
And then, by the way, we can send this.
Yes, we will send these to you
Okay.
if you like. Capture congregational stories, and then develop new measures of vitality.
And if I can just add for that piece, as Tony was saying, we'll send this shows and its elements to you. But that last bullet there ties back to the mark of ecclesial health. One of the things that we don't do often is, I think we're getting there in terms of hearing the stories from people and allowing people to share their stories, but we don't do as well at telling our story, telling them internally, right? Again, there was a point in history where people were compelled to support congregations and churches because it was the will of God for their lives. And here we are. Now people want to support things that they believe in. So the question is, what are you doing? Because if you show the stories or tell the stories about what the congregation is doing in the community where you're planted, people will support you. Number one, people who are part of your congregation, but also the communities around your congregation. That becomes a part of missional clustering, where there's other organizations who will join you in the work that you're doing. And I think this is so important to what Jeff was saying earlier about having stories that you share with the mission agency, because Dee and her group, communications, will share them with the larger denomination, because there may be someone else who's doing the same work you're doing here in East Iowa, in San Francisco, or in New York, that says, hey, let's partner, and we have this endowment XYZ. Right? So, again, thank you, Tony. All of these marks work together as identifiers for vitality. And this two-year program, one of the things that we like to share is, it comes up as a question often, is how much does it cost? Well, drum roll, it's free. Now, there are two parts of the program that have costs. For example, if you want the material printed by us for you, we provide it to you digitally. But if you want it printed by us, it's $30 for us to print and ship and pack it.
Yeah.
And then there's the U.S.
CDS.
Congregational
Yeah.
Vitality Survey, USCDS surveys that you can take as the presbytery or the individual congregations can take. And there's a cost for those surveys. That happens like over in the second year. But
And there's a minimal cost between $120 and $300.
$300, right. But we
For the whole thing.
for the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we meet with you quarterly. Once upon a time, it was you enrolled with us, and let me take a pause. Once upon a time, when we first started, you had to apply to be a part. Now it's an open enrollment. Love that. It's open enrollment. If you say you want to be a part, you are part. We once had it where you had to come to meet us in some city around the country to begin your two-year journey. Now we do that as an online set of quarterly meetings rather than one meeting and then you're on your own for 2 years. Now we meet with you quarterly online to guide you through the journey. That is, again, our encouragement for pastors to work together is also us being in cohort with you more often. Provides more opportunity for question and answer, but mostly for us to hear what your needs are. Again, Dr. Hendricks, who will be with us next week, and Warren, I'll share this before we're gone for the day. We have some dynamic speakers that will be with us, one who's in the room. But a part of this time that we'll spend together.
What are you doing in another week?
At the end of, so I'll give more detail, but we're from October 30th through November 3rd. There's 2 conferences being held at Montreat. The first one is an evangelism conference, and the second is an event we call the Immersion. And the first is primarily folks from within the Presbyterian Mission Agency sharing in an evangelism conference and moving from harm to hope. And the latter is primarily folks from the academy sharing information from their writings and what have you about how we're more actively the church in the world. Okay. But yeah, all of these are ways of how do you become more connected. And again, I just want to say that there's not a charge to get started. There's not an application. We will start a new wave in the spring, and we're looking forward to having you all to be a part of that, having your congregation. So again, as Tony said, this is a time for you all to ask any questions you have.
If we could,
Yeah.
can we table the questions?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think I'm gonna unroll an even larger package
Yeah.
than just the congregational vitality piece. And I wanna be sure